Welcome, Mary, to
Thank,
this co-creating the third attractor conversation.
thank you, Daniela. Yes, it's really good to be here, and yeah,
Yeah, I
happy.
was so looking forward to having this conversation with you because I know that you have thought a lot about all these topics. And can you believe it? It's the 22nd conversation already that
Is it
I'm doing.
really?
Yeah.
Goodness heavens!
And
Oh my
it's
goodness!
not repeating anything. Every single one is kind of adding to the puzzle, to the
Right.
to the complexity of the topic here.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's good. That's a very it's a good sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always start with one question. I know you know the term, the third attractor. Can you, in your own words, describe it, what it means
Mhm.
to you? And then also, what you think is the most important thing we can do to actually co-create the third attractor?
Mhm. Yes. Well, I think probably, I mean, I have listened to some of your conversations, Danielle, but certainly nothing like 22. But
Yeah.
I think, like many of the ones I've heard, I'm familiar with that concept from Daniel Schmackenberger's use of it, yeah. And I guess for me, I think your um, listeners are probably familiar with that. There's three options in terms of he presents in terms of the meta crisis really and how we go forward, how we proceed. And I think I it's just a matter of probably language, but I don't see them as three attractors. I see the first two, one of which is basically um, an unraveling, really, a sort of non-response to the meta crisis,
Hmm. Hmm.
or our sort of avoiding or ignoring it or really not responding to it will inevitably, in his view, lead to an unraveling of civilization, really, and even destruction of the planet or destruction of a large part of the planet.
Hmm.
That's one of them. The second one is a response to that would be authoritarian, a very sort of authoritarian top-down control to mitigate the crisis. And obviously, the means are being created for that through this techno, surveillance, etc. So that's a real possibility. And those two, in a way, go together. I don't see them as attractors. I see them as almost defaults if we don't do something. And the third is, I think, again, it's interesting, Daniela. I was thinking a little bit about it. I don't see it as an attractor, because an attractor to me feels like, well, there's going to be some small group of people will create something that everyone else will then go, yes, that's what we want to go towards. It might be like that, but I think of it more as perhaps this goes along with the second part of your question. I feel that in a way, we can't build on what is. I really feel that we need to take a very deep, long look at how we got here and the kind of thinking, the kind of motivation, the drives, the sort of philosophical or spiritual, so you could say basis or lack of it that has got us to
Hmm.
where we are. And I think, in a way, unless we take that in very deeply as a not just as individuals, but as a sort of civilization, particularly Western civilization. I think I'm probably going to focus on that a little bit more. Then I think it's going to be very hard to build something else that's going to be deeply sustainable and deeply rooted, something really different. So that's where my focus is. I think that, and just to say, I don't see that deep sort of facing where we are and how we got here as in opposition or as a counter to action now. I don't see those two as polars, but as working together. But I don't think that co-creating or creating a third attractor is really going to be sustainable without a deeper than we are already doing look at more than a look, but in embrace of how we got here.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, basically, with all that you're saying. And my question that I grapple with a lot is there are people that have done this kind of deep looking to a certain extent, and they come to conclusions. So, and they come to conclusions that actually can lead to a different way of life and a different style, a different way of living together, coming together, a different way of treating each other and the planet.
Mhm.
And I can see that pockets of this new way
Mhm.
of living and acting could act as an attractor over time because people would become curious. Because if it's the real thing, I would expect these proto communities, as Jim Rutt calls them, or yeah,
Mhm.
prototypes of a different way of being together. If they really work, they should be attractive looking from the outside, and one should
Mhm.
look at them and say, "Oh wow, that's actually cool what they are doing. That
Mhm.
actually feels different, looks different, has a
Mhm.
different style, different expression." And that's why I still talk about the attractor, even though I understand
Mhm.
what you are saying, that we I don't think it will work that somebody comes up with an idea that you can put out there and then everybody is
Mhm.
flocking towards that. But creating examples of a
Mhm.
different way of
Mhm.
life could be an attractor.
Yes, no, I agree with you on that. I think that prototypes are critical to to exactly what you're saying. And I think that the more there are and the more visible they are
Hmm.
to, and the internet obviously helps with that, then they can, fulfill what you're saying. But I think I still question, Daniela. I have a little bit of a question because I want to go into that a little bit later with you, I think, but because I think prototypes are very, very important and they are happening and they are based on a different sort of value system and uh,
Yeah.
a different sort of worldview, really. But I do feel a little bit in the West, particularly, that, and I'm including myself in this, obviously, I'm not sure with the prototypes that are Western based, because obviously the world is very varied, and I think there are different needs in different areas, and the way this is going to unfold is going to look differently according to, different contexts, geographical,
Hmm.
cultural, social, very, there are, and I think that's important part of this mosaic. I think it's going to be a mosaic somehow. If we make it through, which I think we can, we
Hmm.
could.
Hmm.
Um, but that's why I want to focus on the West a little bit because I think a lot of I think the Western prototypes are very, very good. But I wanted to go back. I think essentially this is whether one calls it a spiritual problem or a existential issue. How did we get to where we are? I'm not that sure that I think there's more work all of us need to do around that because there's quite a lot of talk about grief, which I completely, resonate with. I think if we really let in what's going on, and the kind of losses that have already happened and the world that we're in right now and the world that we're creating inadvertently, the
Hmm.
destruction that's happening on a daily basis of the natural world, for example. And but not only that, the frightening sort of statistics now for sort of starvation and the crises that are happening, conflicts in different countries, we have actually entered that breakdown. And there's less and less media on some of that too. It's from some of the mainstream media. So we can live in a little bit of a bubble, really, about it to the degree that it's happening. So I feel like it's not just being aware, it's very important that we're aware of what's happening. But I think also that there's how can I say, um, a little bit of a normalization of our privilege, those of us who are exempt from the immediate impacts of the meta crisis we're in. And what I mean by that is I'm not someone who's sort of a anti-Western, anti-modern. I'm not completely, but I think there's a lot that we need to dig deeper into to question about our own lifestyles because otherwise, our prototypes, and I'm very, very supportive of the prototypes, I want to say that are happening, and some of them have gone deeply into this, but I think it's very easy for us to, how can I say, I'm not sure how much we've let in civilizationally as Western culture, the cost, the cost of the privileges we have and the positive things we have and the positive things we bring to the world, right? The positive side of that, of modernization. But the extent that we're disconnected from from the whole, and what I mean from the whole, from the cosmos, from source, from the fact we are a living, interdependent, interconnected organism, the planet, the earth, that consciousness, the consciousness of that, the living consciousness of that, because I think when we are, then there's a sense of responsibility for the whole.
Hmm.
There's a
Hmm.
sense of
Yeah.
care for the whole. And yeah, I think that those things become, they naturally start to awaken in us. And I think and it extends beyond our own community or our own nation or our own people, our own tribe, whatever. So I think that our disconnection from that is a very important thing just to hold in our own consciousness because I think it plays out every day. I know for myself, there's things that I have available in my life that have a cost right now in the world somewhere. Now, can I do something about it? Sometimes not. But if I'm not aware of that, I am participating in the sort of blind, sort of forward movement of those things and the reinforcement of them. So I just
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
sort of put a little more attention on that because I think the prototypes are very important. I'm just saying I'm not sure if we have really done quite enough. Yeah,
Are you saying, I just want to
mm,
see if I understand you
yeah.
correctly. Are you saying we are not ready even to prototype because we have not let it in enough?
No, I'm not saying that. Not saying that. I think it's critical that we do prototype and that we move with the knowledge or awareness or motivations that we have to create something different. I think that's critical because there's
Yeah,
no waiting. We can't wait. And also
exactly.
if we do wait, a vacuum is there. And as we know, darkness fills the vacuum usually,
Yeah.
or sort of so no, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that I think sometimes we forget. I think they both have to be, I think the prototypes need to be developed, but I think we need to do more. Yeah.
You see, I would say
Mm.
it probably differently because I agree
Mm-hmm.
with everything
Mm-hmm.
that you are saying. Therefore, for me, the prototypes would have to include
Yes.
this more
Yes.
fully life embracing consciousness, awareness, and would have from the start have to start there with this cosmic consciousness or world consciousness or globe consciousness, nature consciousness, that would need to be the starting point. And at the same time, I also feel, and that makes it so challenging, I'm aware of that, we
Mm-hmm.
are where we are. We don't
Mm.
have a different starting
Mm-hmm.
point, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And we are 8 billion people. So when we think of moving forward, what I find always mind-boggling, or where see in myself kind of no way out. How can something new be built or be generated or emerge that would include the 8 billion people,
Hmm.
and not
Hmm.
just the prototypes? I can totally
Hmm.
see that we can build islands of new
Hmm.
consciousness, new living together, new culture. What I cannot see at all, and I find that quite saddening, is a solution
Hmm.
for the majority, let's put it like this, of the
Hmm.
people.
Hmm. Right. No, exactly. Um, I think maybe I'll just give a little example of what I'm trying to say, because I agree with you. I'm not thinking like how do we necessarily I don't think we can take we can do that, because I think there's an element of unknownness in this. I think there's only so much we the current population or
Hmm.
generation can do, and then but we need to set in motion new
Hmm.
new motivations, a new consciousness. That's what I see. But just to give an example, Daniela, of what you're saying, um, what I'm more pointing to is that, and I'm basing this on anecdote, really, on the sort of communities and prototypes that I either know personally or I've read about, or spiritual communities. I want to include those as well, spiritual groups. And I'm part of those too, some of them. And what I notice in that, it's not that they don't have what they do have, as you said, their motivation comes from a sensibility, an emerging sensibility of the whole, of our interconnectedness. A lot of the practices are based on that. But what I think some of them anyway lack is a little bit of an awareness of and I use the word colonial, but the dominant subordinate structures of Western culture that it's been built on for the last at least 400, if not more years, that are operating in all of us. And give an example. I want to give some examples of how we can rectify that as we're building those prototypes too, because I've
Hmm.
seen that
Hmm.
happen too, because I've seen communities that just say a land base that are trying to create something different. Now, when we do that and we move, then we're obviously there's usually a population that already lives there, right? It's particularly if we move to a different continent. And
Hmm.
so there are resources, right? Resources that we all need when we move to the land, or we need to live wherever we are. Now, how much in the sort of dominant subordinate paradigm, which has been what colonialism has been built on, which is the West's advantage now, is still built on and is still operating out of, actually, in terms of it's a consciousness, it's a mindset. The way
Hmm.
I've seen that played out in a positive way, and in ways that need more attention, I think, is where people go, they have more money, they have more resources, they can set up a situation that's sustainable, that has, you know, all the things we want. That's great. Now, how much has that happened in cooperation with the local people? Sometimes that is happening, and that's exactly what I'm pointing to, where there's
Hmm.
that awareness of privilege and resources. So how much is that being worked out in a new way with the local population, for example, or how much is it not? How much is it? How much are those advantages displacing the local population, whatever. So that has, and that's what I mean, is where that's happening and there's engagement, communication, and working together. That to me would be an example of that new consciousness operating versus just creating a new community that's got solar, it's got, it harvests its own water, it's providing for itself, it maybe gives some benefits to the local community, but it's not working together in a way. So that's what I mean, is that both of that, and also just to move into sort of spiritual communities, I think in the West particularly, sometimes spiritual communities tend to be create a binary with action. I think we've talked about that together at other times, but sort of social activism or being or understanding the spiritual principles that we value and are developing, how they operate in the world, how they can create a new world rather than being something that benefit us and maybe even give us more of a cosmic consciousness or do you see what I mean? But the integration of those in real time, I think demands an awareness of where we are now, which is an element of grieving what we're really. But also, I think there's a healthy, can't think of it, a healthy awareness, a healthy shame is too strong because often shame is very constricting. But I think there's an awareness that we need to carry of the West's advantage that then informs how we bring this new consciousness into being together.
Yeah.
Does that make
Let
sense?
me, yes, it makes
Mm,
total sense. And that's
mm,
exactly what we have to grapple with. And I want to
mm,
give you a counter example also in the
mm,
sense of anecdotal, probably, but it's
mm,
not just anecdotal. And it's actually
mm,
two instances of anecdote. Like
mm,
my brother lives in Kenya for
mm,
15 years or 20 years already in rural Kenya, not in the city,
mhm,
outside somewhere. And I live here in Tiruvannamalai, also in a rural environment. And my brother was a postmodern young man when he went
mm,
there with all the postmodern values and
mm,
exactly this awareness to do
mm,
something different. And Mary, I cannot tell you how many times this didn't work and he got treated badly and stolen from
mhm,
and not treated as an equal
mhm,
because the environment he was in was so tribal still that the tribe was the most important
mhm,
in this
mhm,
cooperation that you are
mhm, mhm,
rightly advocating.
mhm,
There was no equal footing
mhm,
because when it when it came down to the transaction or who benefits from what,
mhm,
he was taken advantage of
mhm,
many
mhm,
times.
mhm, mhm,
And the same is true, unfortunately, here in our little village where the vision holder, we are just
mhm,
living here, but the vision holder tried to do exactly what you described, Mary. Exactly that. Treat them as equal, pull them in as cooperation partners, build something together. And it's not exception. It's almost it's by now after 5 years, almost like every second relationship that was built like this turned out to go sour because it was not honored from the other side. And I say this with a lot of sadness, and I don't know what else one can do
mhm,
but
mhm,
try again and again.
mhm. Yeah,
But
no, yeah.
there is a fact in different value systems of trying to cooperate, if you want to call it value system, or different
Mhm,
styles of trusting each other or different.
mhm,
If you come with a world-centric consciousness and you meet a tribal consciousness that has a different value set inherent in this,
mhm. No,
and
I think
it's
that's a
difficult.
very, I totally appreciate that. I hear you. But I'm wondering if there's a way, because it has been successful in some places, and I'm wondering if it's because what you're describing, Daniela, is certain types of consciousness that have inbuilt into them certain expectations of engagement and exchange and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering whether I think someone like your brother and the community you're part of, from what you describe, I think that's really admirable that there's an attempt to do things in that sort of equal cooperative way. But I'm wondering, even as you said, that's more of a Western postmodern. And now, is there a way, and I don't know, but of engaging as human beings? And that's why I said resource sharing rather than sharing of sort of values, because I understand that tribal values. Tribe is always going to be more, hold more fidelity to its tribe. That's tribal. And we have, as you said, a postmodern consciousness is different. But I'm not talking about blending those or bringing those values together. But I think there is a level of human value that we can meet on. And I'm not saying it's easy at all, but I think that those fundamental human values, when they're recognized and we're not our expectations or the others, quote, others' expectations, neither are being negated or nor attempting to, not impose, but to be the sort of ground that the meeting occurs on. I think I don't know, I just feel it needs to be, it's not that I have the answer to that, Danielle, but I have seen it successful. And it's almost like where it has worked, there's two groups that are living together, but they're living amicably because the resources have been shared. That's been or worked out in a way where there's not this displacement. That's more the point. And I think there's also human relationships. So people start to interact in that way on just on a simple human level.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
That's what I'm
That's
talking
very
about. When you
important.
create those
No, no.
human relationships, it somehow creates a ground. It can help create an atmosphere for those difficult decisions about resources. That's really what I was talking about, not a kind of bringing of postmodern values, because I could see that would be very difficult.
No, no, for sure. It has to start with human relationship. But wouldn't you say even human, or
Mm.
especially human relationship, often are based on at least certain shared values? Otherwise, it's not working.
I think that's really interesting. Um, Certainly, to some degree, I would agree on that. But I think, and as you know, I lived in India. I've probably lived in India 10 to 15 years in total in my life, and for 7 at one time. And I've spent a lot of time there. And so I'm very aware of the issues that you're talking about and the problems that, for example, India faces. But I think there are certain human values that are intrinsically human, and they're intrinsically expressive of the fact we are connected, we are one. And what I mean by that is empathy, love,
Mhm.
care, not where they're sort of, I'm going to be a caring person, but these are natural to the fact that we are, to the deepest spiritual truth, you could say that we're one. These are natural and they're often, how can I say, distorted or whatever, suppressed even by the conditioning of whatever, whether it's a tribal consciousness or a postmodern consciousness or a modern consciousness. They often go through these filters that filter, that mediate them in not necessarily a good way. But I think when you get right back there, there's people recognize care. They recognize kindness. They recognize fairness. They recognize these are deep human values that are prior to culture in a certain way. And I think when they are there, very simple, not attached to any kind of transaction either, then relationships start to build. And it's interesting, and I say that again, it's anecdotal, but some of the relationships I had when I was living in India, when I was living there for a long period of time, it was 30 years ago, some of the people I knew then and their children, there's still a relationship of,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? That's, yeah. So I just wanted to say, I think this is also something that I think is a little bit underrated in us, in our, I mean, in our Western spiritual world, is the power of our simple humanity, because um, a lot of the elements of that, when we go right back beneath even what we think of our kind of values, are very deeply human and expressive of the unity that we really are part of. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, and
Mm,
I mean it's true, and it all starts and ends with a relationship.
mm,
I think what I was pointing to was more how stable are these relationships then when the values, some other values, transactional values, are not shared. You know, the
mhm,
moment,
mm,
even, wouldn't you say, even like, let's stay in a more homogeneous context, like a spiritual community.
mm,
The reality of human beings living together is only revealed when you actually live together and have
mm,
transactions, and money is involved,
mm,
work is involved, who gets what when, and like this very practical ways of
mm,
how we live together and
mm,
how we balance the contributions and these kind of things. And this, I think, what I'm trying to say is this is already difficult in a homogeneous cultural environment, as we both well know, no?
mm,
And when you then mix different culture, it gets even more challenging. I'm not saying it's not
mhm,
possible, but it
mhm,
gets even more challenging
mhm.
because the common ground is even more shaky in a way.
This is really interesting. This is probably something we could have a whole conversation on in itself. But I think I agree with you, Daniela. I do. I can see the point, but I'm also, I think I think you're right, and I share that experience with you. I think working together, this is when as you said, even in a homogenous spiritual community, the challenges arise. But those are very specific. Also, I think a lot of these are very contextual, right? And part of the challenges that I think I'm aware that or I think that you're referring to, come also from a Western homogenous spiritual group where we're also carrying our individuality and the development of individuation, which is stronger than, say, in what you were referring to before as a tribal or
Hmm.
pre-modern. And individuation is a gift. Believe me, that I think is part of human, yeah, the unfolding of human consciousness, obviously. Uh, but at the same time, as we're both aware, hyper-individuation is also the bane of our current time, and narcissism, and a lot of the problems that very well-intentioned, including ones we've both been part of, communities have, is dealing with this. Is
Yeah.
this particular structure that is relevant there? Whereas if you go to a culture that's still running on more traditional values, you could say, and I don't mean the negative traditional, but the more pre-modern, the more communitarian. The communitarian values are more alive, and I witnessed that actually during COVID. I was in India during 6 months of COVID, and in a village, and I just saw that spring alive. And this is a village that has people have their independent enterprises. It's a village in the 21st century. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when a crisis hit, then those values sprang alive. There was care for the elderly, there was care for this, there was, the food was distributed, the fishing, the fishermen operated in a way where they took care of the village first before the others. But
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
farmers began to, when they realized they couldn't sell their produce anymore, they began to distribute it through the villages, etc., etc. There were just these different, and so I think there is a way. All I'm saying is I feel that there are things that postmodern cultures very positive about that, obviously. that have rectified some of the negatives of pre-modern and traditional, but there are also the other way where the positives of traditional and pre-modern, there's a meeting point in that, I think. And I don't want us to spend our whole time on this, but I think there's a meeting point we can find in that where I think, and I think it's part of what's needed for moving forward. It's not the
Yeah, yeah,
whole, but if we're thinking about the world, as you were saying, with all its its diversification, how do we do that? I think there has to be something quite, we have to go back to a certain simple, basic values in a way that are
yeah, yeah. No,
that are
I
in
totally agree.
yeah, that are inherently spiritual. And then we have to allow those to sort of how do they work in our different contexts? How do they work? How do
Yeah.
we bring those to the forefront? And where there's an exchange and there's respect and at the same time also awareness of some of the I don't know about your brother in Kenya, but I know that in Africa in general, there's still quite a, how can I say, quite a memory and quite a lingering of colonialism and colonial structures, and that brings its own reaction. So I wanted to bring this into the larger conversation we're having is I think we're in process. A lot of these things still suffer from the hurts of the past as well and on both sides, so there's a lot that we're in the process of to use that word that's very overused I think now, but composting or metabolizing. I think culturally there's a lot to metabolize that I think is part of our going forward. It's not the totality of it. We need all the ingenuity, the creativity that's coming out, but there's also an element of metabolizing our history
Hmm.
um, in order to be able to hold some of the grievances too, and the sort of sense of reaction that comes our way, perhaps, for those of us who are, um,
Yeah, yeah.
are trying to make change, right? So there's a lot there that I think we're talking about that all I want to say was I think that's part of what needs to, if we're co-creating a third option for the future, that's a part of it that's very, I don't
Hmm.
see talked about that much, except maybe in uh, so decolonial narratives have part of that. They do, but then
Hmm.
maybe they
Hmm.
don't have, other elements. But I think we need to bring these different elements together.
No, absolutely, and that's exactly what I realize more and more, that it looks like so many people have and see and are in contact with parts of what needs to happen. Therefore, it's so interesting to have these conversations, and I feel
Mm,
more and more it's so there are so many aspects that need to come into
yes.
consideration, and therefore it's so valuable to get these different perspectives and then see, okay, what does that mean overall? How can we take this all into account without breaking, without
Yes,
giving up, and
exactly.
still try to move forward, even so it's so overwhelming in a way,
Hmm. No, well, I agree because it's a lot, and that's why we need each other really, and I think
Yeah,
and that's why I think also our spiritual practices, whatever they are very important. We need to
yeah.
keep reconnecting, renewing our connection to the whole, and I think to be able to carry all this and to move forward, because I think if we do, Daniela, some of this can become motivation, because part of it is this third attractor or this third option for the future. It comes from motivation, and for myself anyway, and some of the other people that I work with or know, letting in the unthinkable. And it first started for me, this particular area we've just been speaking about, it was actually from friends in India who were sort of knocking on my shoulder going, hello, are you aware? And it began to open up a world for me that expanded beyond India. And I found that when I could let that really in, it actually motivates me in a way.
Hmm.
And So I think that that's an important part, and I think our interconnectedness too. I think community is so important, and
Yeah.
I I actually listened to Grace, your interview with Grace, and her idea of a
Oh,
community
really?
of communities.
Yes,
And
yeah,
I loved that idea because I think in a way we need to have this sense of there's lots of different communities and they're contextualized and they're bringing different things and
yeah,
they're holding different pieces of it. But having a community of communities, you feel that you're being held as well
yeah.
by the whole, right?
You
Without
know,
anyone, without just to
this
say,
is one
without,
of the
yeah.
aspects
Hmm.
that come up again and again, like
Mm,
this sense that we need to have networks that
hmm.
interconnect without sharing exactly the same values, doing exactly the same things, but that have these connection points
Hmm.
where we can interchange, where we can learn from each other, where we can also uplift each other. That's
Exactly.
something,
Mm.
one of the themes that goes through many of the conversations.
Is it? That's interesting. Yes, I'm not
Yeah,
surprised because I think in that, Daniela, the things that we share, which is a sense of care for what's happening and a sense of responsibility for the future, we may understand those slightly differently in different parts of that, as you said, as of that wider network. But they're all important, I think, that they are being held. And I think that it is it's yeah, for support it's important, and I think respect is a very big part of that too. I think, us
yes,
being able to respect that someone's holding a different part of this, and what can I or we learn from it, and where's the reciprocity of learning and respect and holding history. I think history is a big thing to be able to hold without going into the right and wrong and the reactivity, but being able to hold the truth of history, which, to be honest, for the West right now is quite difficult, I think. No.
yeah, yeah. No, that's true.
Mm,
And what I also hear in many of my conversations that while this this recognition that it would be so important to
mm,
connect between the networks is there, and many express that. What I heard also a lot, and I'm pretty sure you will agree to that too, it's hard to take the time or have the
mm,
time to do that actually, because the
mm,
people that are engaged in this kind of community work, whatever it is, just in this kind of, we want to do something in this kind of activism, no, most of them are so busy with what they are doing that there is hardly any time for this wider reach to actually
mm,
see what other people are doing. And that's
mm,
also something that I have heard quite a few times, and nobody has really a recipe how to
mhm,
remedy that.
mm. No, I think that's also very true. It's one of the challenges, and
Hmm.
I think of our time, and obviously the internet is part of that. There's sort of, and there are gatherings, and again, I know in Europe and America and India, South Asia, there are gatherings where maybe 50 groups will come together. And those, I think, are, they're not the sort of meta community of communities or network of networks, but they serving that. They're expanding
Hmm.
and creating. And so I think we're in a process really. And the other thing I liked about your previous speaker was she used the word where in the autumn, I think, or the fall of our sort of evolution.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And I thought that's
exactly.
very interesting because you can
Hmm.
sometimes think, well, we're in the spring, these little shoots are happening, and shoots are happening. But I
Yeah,
actually think we haven't gone through the winter yet. And it's largely
no, I
because of,
agree.
for me, I feel it's part of, as if we really were, we would be starting to move forward more. And the fact is, the dominant consciousness has not shifted.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to focus a little bit on the West on this. I think largely we're enveloped still in a way of life, many of us, not all of us for sure, but that allow us to be a little bit oblivious to the crisis we're actually in. Because once we
It,
become aware of it, we begin to feel motivated to want to do something different. We begin to look and et cetera, et cetera. Look inwards, look outwards. And I think that the dominant consciousness is still, yeah, very stuck. So I would see this as there's at the same time, I see a lot of change manifesting this new consciousness. If you
Yeah.
call it new, it could be also seen as very ancient consciousness.
Old,
Ancient
exactly.
consciousness in a contemporary form is more like I see many,
Yeah.
many as you do. That's and that gives a lot of in a way
Hope.
hope. Or yeah, it
Yeah.
does positive hope. Um, but I see it as just the very beginning, and that we haven't yet really gone through the crisis, unfortunately, that I think we're going to go through, which would then allow that's when I think these prototypes are going to be absolutely critical because they will already have gotten a stab, they will have already worked through some of the things that we're going to need,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of new economics, new agriculture, new governance, communitarian practices, new ways to think and do. I think, yeah, they're going to be critical at that point, but we're not there yet. And I think this is the other thing I like is we are in a long process here,
The
unfortunately.
question is if we have the
Mm,
time, no? Like, was it
that's
Grace
it.
that said we probably need 200 years? And I was wondering
Mm.
if we have the 200 years, no?
Well, I agree. I think both are true. I actually agree with her. And there's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
Rinpoche that Steve and I met in India who says 500 years for this real
yeah,
transition of consciousness from the
yeah,
consciousness we're in, which is, as we know, disconnected from the whole and all the implications of that, to a consciousness that's different in even with its diverse manifestations. I think that's true, but at the same time, I feel it's critical, it's urgent that we act now. But somehow, I think I began this conversation because I think the action is critical now, that we act on what we have and what we know. But at the same time, we leave a lot of space, a lot of humility for that inside of us and inside of our communities, inside of our cultures that's led us here. I think that's very, very important. Those two need to be working together.
yeah, yeah. I do want to come back to one thing you said
Mm,
about the West, and I'm
mm,
staying with the topic because you are
hmm.
the one conversation part that feels strongly about this
Right.
topic, and I do too, a little bit different.
Mm,
I just feel like we have to be careful also just to blame the West, and because right now when you look at all the countries in the world, China is a huge country, India is a huge country, and is on a similar trajectory as the West was.
absolutely.
Now you can blame the West for that. I can even take that and say, okay, we didn't give a good example. But fact is, this is going on now. And also fact I feel is that in the West, and especially in Europe, even more
Hmm.
than in the US, I feel a lot has happened already to change the awareness, like of environmental questions, of
Hmm.
clean water, clean energy, uh, means against pollution. And when I compare that with huge countries like India, how much of this you can say small instrumental things that still would be needed here to bring the change in the outer, not the inner, not the consciousness change, but the change in the outer,
Hmm.
the change for the environment. I feel like I want to be careful to just blame the West, but also
Hmm.
see that while I agree partially with you that we probably have not totally seen what we did to the in with colonization and everything, I also feel we have seen some of the things that went wrong and have turned it already in a different direction,
Hmm.
or are trying to turn it in a different direction. And but for the whole globe it's not enough. It needs
Hmm.
so much change, especially in
Hmm.
the huge countries
Hmm.
like China and India, for it to act. And the US, I mean, the US
Hmm.
is so behind in some of the environmental things, no?
It's regressing. Yes, it is,
Yeah.
unfortunately. It's interesting, Daniela. I wasn't anticipating us to go quite as deeply into this, but I obviously opened it up. I don't see it as blaming the West. I don't see that. I see it more as a way of thinking, as a way of thinking and a value system. And I think, look, obviously, modernization has brought so much that we wouldn't want to lose, in terms of so much, in terms of health,
Hmm.
in terms of women's rights, post-patriot, all of these. I mean, there's many, many things that are valuable, very valuable, that traditional it's particularly many traditional cultures are patriarchal, there, etc. That's one of the big things. But I want to say, I think I would not totally agree that we, quote, Western civilization, and I mean the sort of worldview and operating principles. We operate still out of, if you look at the world, if you just look at it very simply, the global south is where many, many of the resources are. It's
Hmm.
still it's still suffering from a massive inequality of wealth. The wealth is in
Yeah.
the north. The resources are controlled by the north. And if you go deeply into some of this, the practices are still very colonial. Really, we wouldn't call it that, but
Yeah, no, there
and
you're
the
totally right. Yeah, yeah,
major economic institutions favor the West, right? All of
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah,
So that's what I mean. It's not no
yeah,
blaming the
true,
West. It's looking at what is the paradigm that's operating is still coming from that Western thinking that has disconnected from the whole and its intuitive sense of responsibility for the environment, for the planet,
true.
for each other, right? We're
Yeah,
disconnected from
yeah,
that.
yeah,
And that disconnected consciousness has been adopted, you're right, by India, by China, by the world, because
yeah,
the only way they can economically become sort of competitors or is to adopt that. I mean, China literally said that they're going to do that after the
yeah, yeah.
British, after the Opium Wars, which were basically, a terrible stain on British history, which very few people know about. But that ever since then, and the gutting of that, the Chinese civilization really and its own values. And I'm not saying they're all perfect, but none of these were. It's not about romanticizing them. But what happened then, China went through what they call it still 100 years humiliation. And
Mhm.
at the end of the 19th century, uh, there were there was interesting. There was a sort of intellectual debate between those who wanted to sort of continue Chinese deep civilizational values and the modernists who were saying
Mhm.
no, power is where it is. The West have power. They have steel. They have these big ships. Et cetera, et cetera. They steam. They have industrialization, and China then went that direction and actually there's even a huge banner in one of the southern cities which says something about the 100-year humiliation that they were going,
Mhm.
the sort of sentiment was we're going to do better than the West. And that's
Yeah, yeah,
been their motivation. So it's not
and they
about,
probably will.
they probably will. Well, interestingly enough, they are also moving in the direction of exactly you were saying of rectifying some of the environmental
Yeah, they
problems.
do.
They're
Yeah, yeah,
doing it better than the West. So
yeah,
I'm not really putting the West in that way because I'm very aware that many of that it's more that thinking that's been adopted, and
yeah,
particularly the economic paradigm that drives that supports it. That's what I'm questioning. And I'm saying that we have
yeah,
to
yeah,
somehow row back and look at what's that done from in terms of the environment, in terms of the extreme inequality, et cetera, that's happened. Because the truth is, Danielle, we have enough resources. We actually have enough food
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I
for
know.
to work. And it doesn't mean we need to live in a sort of communist regime or whatever, but there is
No,
enough for diversity and equity to happen.
yeah, yeah,
And that is not happening. It's because of a paradigm that I'm saying is very associated with values that emerged out of the West.
yeah,
And when I say the West, I mean the disconnection. from the whole, from being
From the
embedded,
whole, from
yeah,
earth, from
exactly,
being part of nature.
from
Have
being
you
part of
listened to
nature and part of consciousness.
yeah,
I'm not making
exactly.
that distinction. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have you listened to Said Davalabani's
I haven't.
talk?
No,
That
no.
would be an interesting, because he
Mm.
he wrote a book where he is making exactly that point, as
Aha.
that we have
Mm.
to reintegrate ourselves into nature, be part
Yes.
of nature, and not being outside and
Yes.
just extract from nature. That no,
Exactly.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Because I think our spirituality too, our sort of new spirituality, it needs to include that, right? It's
Yes,
seen as
totally.
indigenous, and then we have this
Yeah.
kind of, but actually they're total. And I just want to make one last point on this. That's one of the things that I appreciated, and I'm very, very aware that India has massive problems and massive modern problems too. That's it's got right now. But the thinking, the civilizational, one of the things I appreciate about the wisdom of India, the ancient thinking, was the Dharma. And Dharma is a concept that it was a concept where, I mean, just putting it fairly simplistically, where the deep spiritual principles of wholeness, you could say, a cosmic wholeness, which didn't separate humans from the earth at all, was the Dharma is what is my cosmic place? What's my
Hmm.
place in the cosmos? And the Dharma is one's responsibility in that. And it's not a
Hmm.
responsibility that comes from a dogma. It's inherently, because the
Yeah, yeah.
Dharma is that each individual is born into this world to contribute. We're an inherent, embedded part of the whole. And we each have a particular, I don't know what you want to call it, but innovation or gift or contribution to make. That's our dharma. And it's connected intrinsically with the whole. And so that's the dharma. And that really made sense to me. It's not a dogma because it's very fluid, it's very contextual, it's very. So, in a way, it also allows for what you were speaking through earlier for the different kinds of developmental, you could call them. I mean, I might think of them slightly differently. Conscious, your levels of consciousness
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we
Yeah.
tend
Value
to think
systems
of
or different. Yeah.
exactly
Hmm.
different. But
Exactly.
this in a way, you could say, cuts through that embraces all of that because it's going with an inherent principle that is good for the whole and that
Yes,
we're born
and
into that. So that just want to say the Dharma, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. I'm not saying
I
India lives
understand.
that,
But wouldn't you say in India this exact beautiful thing that you just described also has the downside and expression in the caste system that is still very alive and well. And
Absolutely.
while you could claim,
Hmm.
yeah, that's just where everybody is meant to be, it also has its massive downsides when it's lived at its extreme. And it is. I mean, caste still is a big deal here for how
Absolutely.
you can marry, how you find your partner, how you can act in the world, what you can work. It's yeah, it's just so
Yeah. No,
complex, isn't it? Life is
it's
so
yeah.
complex.
No, it's a terrible. I think caste is a terrible. I mean, personally, I think it's a corruption of the ancient Dharma. Now, I don't
Yeah.
know enough, Daniela, to know that, but I've spoken with various people about it in India. In its current form and past form, I agree with you. It's a really degrading form of
Yeah.
structure, social structure. Uh, and I think many Indians would agree with that. Many wouldn't. But I mean,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. You're fine.
originally,
Yeah.
I felt I understood it as being more artisanal, and it was even there was
Yes,
more
yes,
fluidity through it. It
yes.
wasn't rigid. It was more a little bit similar to the West. You had
Yeah,
your guilds and you had your crafts, and so it
yeah,
was more based on that
yeah,
and
yeah,
and there was fluidity if someone actually wanted to wanted to move out of that into a different artisanal grouping they could. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it was definitely within the yeah, within the sort of view of how
Yeah.
society works. I don't think caste as we know it now and has been in existence for hundreds of years was built into that Dharma as
Hmm. Hmm.
in its corrupted form.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you, and I look, I there's, as we both know, there are young Indians who are trying to sort of bring back some of the deeper principles of India into contemporary time, in a contemporary form that addresses a lot of these
Hmm.
issues, right? That addresses the negatives of of Indian society right now. So again, to me, it's almost like, and some of that means bringing in postmodern values, postmodern, because when something's been eroded or corrupted, then you need to, how do you resurrect that? So that's
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
feel the mutuality and reciprocity is very important.
Yeah, totally. And it's
Yeah.
beautiful to see the postmodern young Indians here, and also how they grapple with pushing back against traditionalism. It's mainly pushing back
Mm-hmm.
against traditional, interestingly enough, not
Mm-hmm.
against modern so much. They
Mm-hmm.
are kind of in between modern and
Mm-hmm.
postmodern,
Mm-hmm.
and they just push back massively against traditionalism and find their own way.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting because I think there are things that to be pushed back in traditionalism, particularly for the women, young women. But there are also groups in India who are bringing the best, the things that we are just talking about from Indian culture, the communitarian, the ways of dealing with conflict in a village, the ways of dealing with law in a village. These ways that were dealt on in a communitarian way, I think are very important and things that we could, going forward, we could benefit from, right? That
Yes, yeah, it's so funny, Mary, how uh, I think we agree in so many things, and life is so complex because,
yes.
here in the village, when you see the men coming together with the bats, because they do the village law because somebody
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
has done something wrong, and they
Mm-hmm.
literally beat him up. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure we want that part.
No, we
So
don't want
it's
that
like
part. We
it's
don't want that
it's
part. No.
I'm not saying you're wrong. It's
Mm.
a
Mm.
lot can be learned from some of these processes,
Yeah,
and a lot you wouldn't want to replicate because it's just
I
really
agree.
ancient, and we have moved in a different direction.
Well, I think just to say that's true, and we haven't. There's an incredible amount of injustice in our system,
Yes,
and
that's
there's
also true.
incredible, as you just pointed out, there are incredible, uh, you know, variations and negative expressions of the older system. That's what I would
Yeah.
totally agree with that. But I mean, again, I've seen it work in very different ways where, where misdemeanors or crimes or whatever are done in a way that to increase social awareness and in a sense
Yes.
of
Yeah.
integrate, and how
Yeah.
do you
Yeah.
integrate someone who's committed something in a village. So both, and we're always going to find negatives and positives. It's more looking at what are the healthy principles in
Yes.
different civilizations and different cultures that we can draw on,
Yeah.
and to to create this, to
Yeah.
create
Yeah.
something different, something that's going to be different. Yeah. So
Yeah.
but at the same time, Daniela, just to keep moving on with this, I think that one of the things that I find heartening is young people across the world. Not all young people, for sure. There's some very bad, very negative cultures, particularly online, as we know. But I think there's an arising now happening, and I think it's because the young people are faced with the reality of now and the future,
Hmm.
and there is awakening a kind of, um, I mean, in some, it's obviously creating a lot of anxiety. There's that, but amongst quite a substantial number across cultures too, and this is what I find so interesting. There's an awakening of desire, a mobilization to create something different, to do something different, and to be different.
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
now. And that I find very heartening. I think it's a response from consciousness itself to
Mhm.
the excesses that we're 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 sort of confronted with right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to come back to the essential question that we have touched upon, and that's the becoming more conscious in a
Mm,
way. Where do
mm,
you see the way forward? We both know how difficult it is for
hmm
people to become more conscious, and you cannot just impose this global consciousness, or that
mm,
people wake
mm,
up to a more unitarian consciousness. Where do you see the way forward, or what is the way
mm,
forward? Is it
mm.
just little steps by all of us where we are, or do you have a bigger vision for that?
Really good question. Big question. I think I mean, I think it's both, Daniela. I think it starts with, I mean, it sounds, almost cliched, but I really think it does start with us. I think that we
Hmm.
all individually have to continually interrogate our own presence here and keep to in not in a negative way. I mean, in a way that's really opening us up, and then
Hmm.
communities. I think small communities. I think these prototypes are really important, and I think they need support from those of us who can in whatever way, whether it's like you're doing, bringing people on to interview them, to we need they need to become visible.
Hmm.
um, so I think those prototypes, and I do think grassroots movements are very important. I think they're
Yep.
important because they bring people together. And I just want to say that's where I have seen, literally seen people from across cultures come together in response to an awakened, you could say, moral sensibility. And I don't mean moral
Hmm.
as in moralistic or
Hmm.
dogmatic or attached to any religion, but a deep sense of something being, of a oneness being violated, whether it's with the environment. I've seen it there. So as you know, I've been quite active in the climate movement. I've also seen it in the response to the Middle East, to the crisis
Yeah.
in Gaza. And again, outside the politics of these and the sort of binary positions and tribal positions, I've seen people across cultures come together, united in just that sense that there's a
Yeah.
violation of our unity and we have to do things differently. And that's, I think, very important. And I think visibility to that is very important because it sends a message. All of these things send a message to our to the whole, you could say,
Yeah.
that the media is not fulfilling right now. They
Hmm.
say something's wrong, and we're demonstrating together. We're calling for something else. So I think there's lots of strands. I don't think there's one particular way, different strands that resonate and echo and awaken all of us. And I think
Yeah.
that I think civil disobedience is one strand, and I found it very interesting that Grace, I was very surprised, spoke
Yes.
about that. But I happen to know the exact activists she's speaking to who've done
Really.
those acts, yeah, through the soup on the Van Gogh. Very few people will see that as a positive thing in
Yeah.
outside of activist circles. But what
Yeah.
she picked up on is it was dramatic. It drew attention to the cause
Yeah.
and it did no harm to anybody or
Yes.
even that painting. And that was very, very
Exactly.
conscious because it's coming from a non-violent philosophical position. So it's not all of those wild actions. And you see, they draw attention to there's a
Hmm.
problem. And I think that's very, very important, Daniela. We need to keep, there is a problem. There is a problem. They're not the solution, but we need at the same time as we're creating prototypes for the way forward. I wouldn't even say solution, but the ways forward that
Yeah.
we need to be cultivating. We also need those voices of protest of the existing system.
Yeah.
We need that because what you spoke to before, how do we bring everyone, or how do these groups move from the periphery to the center in terms of consciousness? That's one of the ways it happens, is that you have these flags being raised. This is not right. I remember was 6 or 7 years ago when there was a terrible mass shooting in a high school in Florida. And I was very struck by the students, 15, 16 years old, who all en masse went to Congress and really pushed. I think it was in 2016, because I think
Hmm.
Trump was in 2017. And they nearly turned him around before the gun lobby got back in. And I think that brings attention to, just sort of letting culture know there's something wrong here. We're
Yeah,
violating deep principles. It's not political. It's not, that. So I think it's very right. And I think Grace was very correct, is that we don't support those young people. And when I say we, the culture doesn't, the
yeah,
governments don't. They're imprisoning them right now, right?
yeah,
They're imprisoning them. They're throwing them out of university. They're barring them entrance to various countries. They're not, you know, and so I think I think that's an important thing. And I think grassroots movements also are producing new leaders. Grassroots consciousness, because it's the consciousness. It's wild, it's unruly, it's not perfect by any means,
yeah,
but it's producing leaders. Oh, look, we've just had Mandami in New York. You know, Jacinda Ardern, some years ago in New Zealand. We have AOC, we have Audrey Tang in Taiwan. You're people who are leaders, within they're not the sort of statesmen, they haven't reached that level, but they are having significant positions in society that can
yeah,
affect
yeah,
change. So I see that. And again, not all of those are, no one's perfect. There's no perfect ideology. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about people who are holding this different conscious. We now have a Green Party here that's produced a leader. I don't know if you've seen it, seen him, Zach Polanski, who's
hmm,
attracting huge movement now because he's
hmm,
he's articulating values that are resonating. So I think leaders will start to emerge because I think we do need system change. But
yeah,
I don't think it's going to come through trying to change the existent paradigm, which is why I think we're in very early on in the process.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
But I do think, because I think eventually, I think education needs to change. I think we need to shift the incentives for life. When young
Yeah,
people need to have incentives for becoming good global or national or community citizens,
yeah,
that
yeah,
become incentivized through our educational system. And rather than what's still being incentivized, which you go and become a trader and you'll make a lot of money, right?
yeah, yeah.
Etc. So I think we do need systemic change, and I think that's why I do think we're still in the very, very, very early stages. But at the same time, to speak to your point about we needs to happen now, it's all needs to happen at the same time.
Exactly. And I'm very aware in our conversation here that we really need all this different movement. We need the grassroots
Mm.
that tear down, and we also need the ones that build, that start to
Mm-hmm.
build
Mm-hmm.
something new.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's the only way how it actually can have a
Yes.
real impact.
Yes. Just to say, I don't see these grassroots movements or even protest movements or civil disobedience as tearing down, because a lot of people see them as being anti. I don't see them as that. I see them as being messages, holding up, reflecting back something that's wrong. So they're almost like calling out rather than tearing down. They're calling out. Just to say, some may be tearing
Yeah,
down, but it's not just the tearing down, because many of those people are also involved in these prototypes. So it's more calling out and moving forward. Just want to put that because,
it- yeah, I
yeah,
understand what you're saying, but for me, tearing down, it does not have to be bad. Sometimes things
okay.
have to be torn down, no?
Mm,
I do think
hmm
sometimes we have to tear down things to be
mm,
able to build up again.
that's true too.
And
Hmm.
I do see some of these protests trying to tear something down that is dysfunctional, and that's fair enough. But I do hope that in parallel there is the same energy going into finding out how could it be different? Because, when you think about the
Mm,
two attractors that stand at the
mm-hmm,
beginning of our
mm-hmm,
conversation, one is going towards chaos. And if we only
mm-hmm,
tear down the old
mm-hmm.
systems without having any idea how it could look different, then the 8 billion people will suffer as much as under the system that they suffer now. I feel strongly it has to be torn down and built up in equal
Simultaneously.
rates simultaneously, so that we have good new solutions instead of just trouble of the old system that was or is dysfunctional.
I agree.
And
Mm-hmm,
it's hard to build new systems that
mm-hmm,
actually
mm-hmm,
work.
mm-hmm,
There is so much that needs to change, no?
mm-hmm. No, I'm in agreement with you. And just to say, having been behind the lines a little bit of that, most of those people are are builders. They're looking to what's new. As that's why I was saying rather than tearing down, I agree with you. We do need to, some tearing down is needed, but it's no good to tear down without something that's to replace it. As you said, we're going to have a vacuum that's only going to be invite the worst, I think, usually,
Yeah.
because darkness fills a vacuum very fast. But but I think a lot of those younger people, or not all young, who are protesting the system we've got are also involved. Most of them that I know are also involved to whatever degree in this building, at least aware of the need for it. So I think those two, and as I said before, I think these are all sort of threads in a tapestry that's needed. We need all of these, as you were
Yeah, we
saying.
need all
We
of
need
this.
them all. One is not going to do it. And in a way, we just have to keep putting everything into it. Because to speak to the urgency, I really think we do not have time. It
Yeah,
demands
yeah.
the urgency and love, because I feel that urgency is coming from love too. It's not even coming there. Of course, there's different layers, and there's anger, and there's grief, and there's etc. etc. Shame. I was talking about earlier, healthy shame, but there's love that is driving this, and I think that's
Hmm.
that's very important. But I also
Hmm.
think we're at the very beginning, and
Hmm.
it needs constant attention and tending, really, and
Yeah.
support. So we need to support all of these. And when I say we need to support, even just in our consciousness, because I think the consciousness that divides and goes is divisive doesn't help.
No, no, exactly. And we need new systems that actually reflect this change. I was just thinking
Absolutely.
when you say most of these protesters are also builders, and I believe you,
Hmm.
I don't see anywhere, for example, economic systems, new economic systems that would scale up, that really could scale, that I see large
Hmm.
scale, even
Hmm.
small scale. Every single community leader I'm talking with, they say, oof, when it comes to money and salaries and what people are living from, and
Mm,
it gets already hard, and which is nothing
mm.
else than that we need new economic systems. We need new ways of balancing work with reward, or however you want to call it, no?
Yes,
and
definitely.
and that
Definitely.
I don't see.
No, I don't see it. I think there are certain communities that have different forms of economy. I think there are. And but there are new economic thinkers, which I'm sure you're aware of. For example, Kate Raworth, there's Jason Hickel is doing a lot, Grace Blakely. I mean, these are different voices who are working on different kinds of different systems. So I think the thinking is going on, but I think you're
Hmm.
right, Daniela. We don't yet have a successful,
Hmm.
implementation of any of that, and
Yeah.
partly it's because we're operating under such a dominant system that
Yes.
is so pervasive. It's very hard for a different system to survive.
Yeah,
But I think
exactly.
it's there. The thinking is there. The Yeah, and I think that we will. I think it's very possible. And funnily enough, this is interesting, and it's not that I'm advocating this, but I think it was Jason Hickel in a conversation recently with one of the new medias here, Novara Media. He was um he was talking. It was quite a long interview, and he was talking about different elements of what we're talking about. And he said at one point that China, he wasn't advocating China. Obviously, there's Chinese culture that are, as horrific as they are anywhere. It's human rights, etc. But he said that they have a different relationship to capital. On one hand, it's a capitalist society, right? It's people, there are businesses there, etc. He said, but they have it, it's not completely, capital is not completely captive to capitalists. In other
Yeah.
words, right? So the government can intervene, has the potential to intervene and direct that
Yeah, that's the
capital.
communist part, no?
Yes, it's the communist part. It's the authoritarian part. It can
Yeah, yeah,
direct that capital to projects or to investing in its people or the infrastructure, which is why it's
yeah,
become such a leader in,
yeah,
ironically,
yeah, yeah,
not ironically,
exactly.
but in, in renewables, and it's released so much land for forests, etc., etc. So it has that capacity, whereas other forms of capitalism, it's becoming captured by a handful of, as we know, billionaires. So
Yeah,
I think also even there's the beginnings of, because I actually think about this quite a bit. We may need an interim top-down phase to some degree, because I think when things really do collapse, there probably is going to need to be, as beneficent as possible, some kind of regulation of what's harmful, some kind of intervention. Now,
yeah,
my
yeah,
hope is that the leaders that are starting to emerge from these so-called grassroots movements, who are starting to get a foot into the system, that people like them will be the ones that fulfill that role. That,
yeah,
because I do think it will be needed at one point, and also to somehow, how can I say, support, you know, as we're saying before, the diverse prototypes that are emerging. Who
yeah,
knows
yeah, yeah.
how? But another important part of this, Daniela, that I see emerging here, and I'm not sure, I probably in the States as well, and definitely in Europe, is this movement for a new kind of governance, a new sort of democracy based on assemblies. Are you familiar with that? On
Yes.
on assemblies, and I think that has a lot of potential, because these are assemblies at multiple levels, from the local to the regional
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
national, and they're done on a jury system. In other words, they're not one particular group. They're it's they're
yeah. They have
selected.
the representatives that then.
Exactly, a bit like a
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
jury from
yeah,
the whole society. They come together. Those people are informed of whatever the problem is that they're going to be working with by experts in that field. So you could really educate. So you have an educated assembly
yes,
that is
yes,
then going to debate and work out together,
yeah, yeah,
you know, come to something that they can then present to whoever the leadership level is there, right up to a national one. And I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that is really, because so often our governments are failing because the ministers are totally uninformed on alternatives, right?
Uninformed or corrupted by
Or
money
corrupted.
and interest. Yeah,
Exactly.
so this
Exactly.
only will work if money is out of the way, and if there
Yeah,
is no way of corrupting the
exactly.
members of these assemblies. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
But
that's why
these
I
are very
think
interesting
these are very interesting ideas.
movements.
That's why I think the fact that they're like a jury system, they're literally put out to sort of whatever, a population of 5,000, 10,000, and people are selected from that, to do it, who are
Yeah,
representative, not of any ideology or party or whatever. They're literally the people. And you see, the more people are involved in something, the more it matters to them, then the more likelihood you're going to come to some form of
yeah,
consensus,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
particularly if they're informed, they're educated. It's not just a mass of people discussing this from their opinions, but they're actually educated on something. So I think all of these they're not just ideas, they're actually happening.
yeah.
Um, I mean, you probably know Ireland, that's how they dealt, finally came to terms with the abortion issue there, which whether people agree with abortion or not, but it became legal there through this methodology.
Hmm.
through through
Yeah.
a general assembly. So I think those things together, all these pieces, we've got a lot of pieces in place that could really.
Yeah. Really could help to
Hmm.
create a new. I
Hmm.
agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we are coming to an end, Mary. we went
Oh, I think we've
we
gone
went
quite
for
over,
quite.
haven't we?
It's
Yes.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah, it's between 60 and 90 minutes normally.
Yes.
But thank you so much. This was really very fruitful and inspiring in the
Mm,
battling of ideas and opinion. No,
mm,
I loved. I
mm.
think that's also needed, like
Yes.
a good new way of talking about things where people don't agree and still have basically a foundation of same
Hmm.
values,
Mm.
because it's so complex topics, all of them.
Exactly. No, I completely agree, Danielle. So complex. And also almost anything one says, one can say,
Yeah,
you
I
can bring
know.
it's just how it
A
is. So it's
counter
almost like,
example.
how do we find our way through this and
Yeah,
somehow bring out the sort of the principles, you could say, that
yeah,
support and in their
yeah,
variety, and also not create a dogma, but be
yeah,
aware, be able to hold the variety of our histories, the variety of our cultures, be able to hold all that and allow these
yeah,
principles that are common, really, that
yeah,
at the deepest level, there's a commonality, be allow them to become the more dominant force
yeah,
for us, driving our future rather than what we have right now.
exactly. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.